Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Embassy of the Federal Republic of Germany in Cairo and the Egyptian Ministry of Environment, I would like to welcome you all to the 55th round of Cairo Climate Talks. The triple bottom line, how corporate environmental and social responsibility can help fight climate change. Thank you all for joining us today and looking forward for a fruitful panel discussion. Today's workshop sheds the light on the important role of corporations in adopting strategies to combat climate change, while realizing the right balance between the social pillar, the environmental pillar, and the economic pillar. Most scholars argue that human and industrial activities are the main cause of climate change, owing to the greenhouse effect, which results in trapping heat inside the Earth's atmosphere, causing a global rise in temperature. It is estimated that the carbon dioxide alone represents 64% of the man-made global warming. It is widely believed that in the past 150 years, the majority of carbon emissions are attributed to the large energy-producing organizations. The Guardian has published an article based on Carbon Majors report, arguing that there are just 100 companies responsible for 71% of the global emissions. The article argues that ExxonMobil, Shell, BP, and Chevron are among the highest contributors to carbon emissions since 1988. And now, please join me in welcoming Mr. Jan Noter, the CEO of the German Arab Chamber of Industry and Commerce, to give his opening remarks for the 55th Cairo Climate Talks.
Your Excellency, Dr. Thwed, Minister of Environment, Your Excellency, Julius Georg Louis, Ambassador of the Federal Republic of Germany to Egypt. Whereas I'm not your host tonight, I'm very excited and I'm privileged, honored to welcome you all to the environment, to the office of the German Arab Chamber of Commerce. Dear ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, on this edition of the Cairo Climate Talks, I would like to highlight the significance of today's topic, corporate, environmental, and social responsibility. Talking from the perspective of the German Chamber, which represents numerous Egyptian and German companies in multiple industrial sectors, CSR and CER matters have gained a lot of momentum. This holds true especially in Germany, where the reduction of companies' footprints and their sustainable operations lead the way. In fact, corporate environmental responsibility is a cornerstone for combating climate change and rising to other challenges like the alleviation of poverty and the protection of human rights, to just name two. This is being reflected in the supply and the value chains for production, the transport, and the wholesale or the retail of consumer and industrial goods. We have to be resource-friendly towards nature. It also touches on other aspects such as green buildings or sustainable warehouse management, and thus setting examples for business and society. It is to be noted that CER is not a luxury, but rather a necessity for the company's successful businesses and their sustainable futures. All of the above has to be supported by adequate policies on a governmental level to go hand in hand with the efforts of the private sector and the civil society. And that's why Germany maintains a national CSR forum, which was launched by the Federal Ministry of Labor and Social Affairs in 2009, and which continues to develop and adopt a national strategy along with the EU strategy on CSR. Within this context, Egypt also strives for corporate, social and environmental responsibility as many companies, many enterprises, banks and, for example, real estate developers raise their efforts towards achieving higher sustainability and reducing their carbon footprints on the environment. Egypt issued a report which represents a complete mapping of the rising role of the private sector relating to CSR matters. This report was issued in cooperation with the United Nations Development Programme, in partnership with the Industrial Modernization Center and through the efforts of the Egyptian Corporate Social Responsibility Center project. It indicates a growing interest and lays the foundation for further initiatives for CSR and CER in Egypt. Ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellencies, in the light of the future of my children, of the future of our children, it is our responsibility to implement sustainable programs aiming at a better world. I therefore wish you a fruitful discussion and good results of these Cairo climate talks. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Yan. The panel discussion will be opened by His Excellence, Mr. Ambassador Julius Georg-Loy, the Ambassador of the Federal Republic of Germany in Cairo. Please welcome His Excellence, Mr. Julius.
Thank you. Your Excellency, Dr. Yasmin Fuad, Minister of the Environment, Mr. Jan Noether, CEO of the German Arab Chamber of Industry and Commerce. You denied being the host, but we consider you as our host because you really provided us with the amenities necessary for having that evening. Ms. Isabel Mehring, head of DAD Cairo and the CCT's regular host. Distinguished panelists, must still be around, esteemed partners and friends of the CCT, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the 55th edition of the Cairo Climate Talks at the German Arab Chamber of Industry and Commerce. The first time here. Hope not the last one. Last week, the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, published its current report. The report stresses that highly urgent change is needed if we still want to grab the diminishing chance to keep global warming to a maximum of 1.5 degrees Celsius. As of today, we have already reached an increase in global temperature of almost 1 degree Celsius in comparison to the pre-industrial times. This might sound little to people unfamiliar with the subject, but the consequences of this warming by 1 degree are drastic even today. Just think of the extreme weather scenarios, one of which, called Michael, will be visited or has been visited already by the President Trump and his wife today. And just think of already tangibly rising sea levels, quickly diminishing Arctic sea ice with giant ice shelves breaking loose, and think of, as I heard, even snow in some parts of Cairo. We feel at home as Germans. In order to limit the incessant increase to a maximum of 1.5 degrees, worldwide carbon emissions will have to be cut by 45% by 2030. And it will even come down to zero by 2075, hopefully. This implies a total transformation of humankind's life as we know and lead it today, if we still are willing to secure the survival of Homo sapiens sapiens and many other current species beyond the next century. An important part of greenhouse gas emissions is produced by the private sector. It is therefore crucial for both the public and the private sectors to work together on this complex issue with smart and new forms of cooperation, awareness building, and innovative technologies. This is why for tonight we chose the topic Corporate, Environmental and Social Responsibility, CESR. We had our expert workshop already this morning and will continue this discussion in tonight's public panel. Tonight we will aim to discuss how business can take protecting the environment into account in their balance sheets by going beyond just profit, but rather focusing on people, planet and profit. We are very fortunate to welcome you, Your Excellency Dr. Yasmin Fuad, Minister of Environment, here tonight. Dr. Yasmin has been a long-time supporter of CCT, I know it myself, and I'm very happy to welcome her here to her first CCT in her new position. Thank you. This CCT would not be possible with the continuous close cooperation between the Ministry of Environment, our embassies and the CCT stakeholders. Thank you. I would also like to use the occasion to thank Mr. Noether, CEO of the Chamber of Commerce here in Cairo, for hosting us here tonight and thereby opening up CCT to new and indispensable audiences in the private sector. Today's CCT is the first one after a long summer break, during which an important part of our CCT team was renewed. Mr. Philippe Maupé has joined the embassy as our new head of the science section and at the embassy side. And Mr. Amram Selim is a new CCT coordinator. And I would like to thank both of our CCT coordinators, Amina Sharaf and Amr Selim, for organizing this CCT. I would like to welcome as well the panelists, which still will be introduced by the moderation. And I think it's very important to have a vivid discussion on these issues here, between the panelists coming from different avenues and from different angles of views. And I'm happy that we have really very well spread, cross-cutting view from many different points of views. Please let me also express my gratitude to Mr. Sherif El Said. Is he here? Ah, there you are. Okay, yeah. It's you, the Managing Director of the CIB Foundation, for leading us through this evening's discussion. Well, to all of us, fruitful discussion and new insights into how CESR can and has to contribute to keep climate change small and adapt it to its already irreversibly induced consequences. A serious issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellence, for the opening speech. And now please help me in welcoming Her Excellency Dr. Yasmin Fuad, the Minister of Environment of Egypt, for an opening remark.
Good evening. Your Excellency, Ambassador Julius, CEO of the German Chamber. It's really an honor and a privilege to be here today. We've been discussing the CCTs for quite some time. Before starting on the topic of today, let me just give a quick snapshot on the Cairo climate talks, because that's really an evidence of the long-lasting relationship between the Ministry of Environment in Egypt and the German embassy. It has been evolving over time, a year after another. It started first with issues related to climate talks. And we said we need to give the focus on the climate change issues. We were very much enthusiastic about it. As you know, the environmentalists, they were very much attached to their issues. And then a year after another, we found that Cairo Climate Talks started to be the platform that we would like to start discussing issues in a very open manner. We'd like to find that platform that would allow an open, honest, transparent discussion, allowing everyone to speak out. Because we felt at that point of time that we really need to listen to the other side of the table. We cannot assume that we know it all. We cannot assume that we're going to improve ourselves just because we are discussing the environment issues among ourselves and attending the workshops and so forth. And from that, Cairo Climate Talks started to be part of our integral life in the Ministry of Environment. It's a partnership. It's a partnership because we discuss what are the topics that we are going to be tackling all over the year. How are we going to tackle that? How it will be useful? Maybe we just need to move 1 inch further, is to document the recommendations that come out from the expert workshop in the morning. That would be very useful for us as the government to fill in the policy gaps, because it comes out from the expert points of view. It's a free discussion, it's transparent, and so forth. So moving to the topic of today. I cannot, by all means, deny the fact that climate change cuts across all the development sectors. And unfortunately, although that I am the Minister of Environment, I would tell you that climate change is a developmental challenge. It's not an environmental challenge. Although by the book it is written that it's a global environment challenge, but in nature and in practice it is a developmental challenge. It hits hard our development process. It hits hard the economy without any mercy, whether it's a developed or a developing country. So from that perspective, we need always to remind ourselves what are the issues that we need to come up with, how are we going to discuss that, what are the gaps, and how can we fill that. So the CESR is one of those tools that we need to think of within the context of the government of Egypt. And there is a reason for this. The reason is the regular business as usual scenarios will not work. They will not work because the government cannot have it all and cannot make it all. So simply engaging of the various stakeholders would be necessary in the year 2018, a year where Egypt is going through a very aggressive socio-economic transformation, a real paradigm shift. If we are doing this, then we cannot say that the Ministry of Environment will solely be responsible for the reduction of the pollution or even the sustainable management of the natural resources, which is the main concept of sustainable development. From that perspective, a couple of months ago, we as the team in the Ministry of Environment started to look further into the issue by looking outside the box. Not because of anything. We had our own projects with the development partners. My colleague, Engineer Maysoon, will be discussing the efforts of our ministry through the EPAP project in a while and how we are doing that. And there are efforts that are conducted by the development partners. There is regulation, there is law. There will be a revision for the law. And there is a kind of cooperation that is taking place among the line ministries. However, that's not enough. And that is not enough for the time in 2018 when a 1.5 degrees Celsius report came out a week ago saying that we will not be able to survive with a 1.8 or a 2 to that extent. So we need to act quickly, we need to act aggressively, and there's no time. I would say 12 years is actually tomorrow, if we really put it in writing. From that perspective, we started to think of how can we engage more the private sector and how can we engage the youth in practical manners, not just words on paper. How can we do that? In order to conserve our natural resources, to sustainably manage those resources, because they should be there for the future generation, we need to engage those stakeholders in practical manners. We cannot do it as the Ministry of Environment. Maybe we can do that now with the load of work that we do, but in 10 years' time, with the complexity of the issues related to the environment, with all the pollutions level, I doubt that anyone can do that. So the only way is the voices of the private sector, the efforts of the youth that will be there in universities. We need to go out to those universities, not only to let them be aware of what they can do for the environment, because they will be holding the responsibility of building up and continuing this with their country, but also to make them really capable, creating incubators for those youth. It's the idea of we're not making them to be aware and just leaving them. And this is the whole idea that we are trying to formulate right now. The tool of the CESR will not be sustainable if we are doing scattered effort with a number of even 100+ companies around Egypt that are adopting the CESR. The Ministry of Investment and International Cooperation a couple of weeks ago had conducted a forum for awarding some of the Egyptian companies for their practices in the CESR. And that was terrific. But guess what? The number around the room did not exceed 50. 50 that is working really with how the books say that this is CESR in a country with the landscape of the Arab Republic of Egypt. That's very difficult. So the multiplier effect will work, but it will only work if we educate our children, if we raise the awareness of the youth, if we let them participate, and if we find for them an opportunity to exercise that. The small and medium enterprises is the way to that. Having those kind of innovation. There are plenty of ideas. I will tell you two only of them. 10 years ago, the Ministry of Environment had that issue of the agricultural waste. You all know that, and the black smog and all those parts. 20 years ago, the biogas units started in Egypt, but it was never spread. You know why it was never spread? Because there was no market transformation. There was no demand and supply. There was no market that grasped those kind of low-cost innovative technology. Once you need to spread the thing into a country, you need to study the market. You need to create the enabling environment. So 10 years ago, the Ministry of Environment embarked on working on raising the awareness, creating small companies for the youth in some governorates where there is a lot of agricultural waste, with the kind of removal of the subsidy, so there is an increase of the price of the fuel. The biogas technology started to spread in Egypt. But we were able to create a demand in the market. This is kind of a CSR where we are saying these are responsibilities toward your community, but at a smaller scale. And this can be enlarged by waste to energy and alternative fuel as a part of that. There are plenty of examples for that. Another simple example is that bike riding that we used to see a couple of years ago on Friday in many of the streets in Cairo. I'm sure that some of those that around the room do use that. This also started as a way of fighting the adverse impact of climate change. You will not believe that, because it is a way of decreasing the use of the regular fuel, thus decreasing the fossil fuel, and so forth. You are encouraging a way of a clean transport. Those kind of ideas, I'm telling you about it because on paper 10 years ago, we never thought that Egypt would be able to really adopt and conduct those kind of practices, and we'd be able to do it. But the only way that succeeded the country to do it is to create a market, is to start establishing a network from the youth to work on those issues and provide a kind of incentive and a venue and a finance to do that. Once that's being done, the multiplier effect will work. The replication and the upscaling of that would work. But without creating the enabling environment, the policies, the regulation, the incentive, the market, the pilot project would succeed as long as the funding is there. And after the funding is being done, it will just fade away. From that perspective, I would like to leave you and to allow the panel for the discussion. I'll be there if you would need any answer to any clarification. I'm happy to be there and to be here today. I'm happy that we are discussing the CESR as a way, but that would be just a one step forward of many, many venues that we can all endeavor and propose ideas to fight the adverse impact of climate change. So many thanks to the German ambassador. Thank you very much for convening that, and much more thanks to the German Chamber for hosting us today. It's really nice to find and to renew our place, because we used to stay there in Zamalek for our nights of the CCT. So we thank you for hosting us today, and I'll leave you. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for your time and your insightful remarks. And now, Dr. Bassem Fahmy will give us the keynote speech. Dr. Bassem is the Principal Advisor and the Program Director of UN Habitat Egypt Office. Dr. Bassem leads UN Habitat Strategic Planning and Development Program that aims to enhance the urban development performance in Egypt. He directs projects at international, national, and regional level to ensure the effective management and the integration of ongoing and expected development programs. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Bassem Fahmy.
Good evening. Change looking to things, usually change things that we're looking at. This is one of the basics role of the quantum physics. It's for anyone who can see that the action movies, sci-fi particularly, ideas and innovative things becomes on our real life. So it becomes true, and weapons and the market absorb it, and it's progressively developing. This might be because of the market of weapon and the national security as well. So it's the right of each country to protect itself. But unlike the natural disaster movies that usually ends with a tragedy that rescuing the characters by the end of the disaster. Although nature can kill as well. Today, 900 million in risk for hunger, and this is expected to be doubled by the mid of this century. I'm going to shed light on two main projects that the UN Habitat undertaking. And I would like to thank Dr. Yasmin to pave the road for this, for the innovative way. It might be simplest way to overcome the problem of climate using different technique and different way of looking to things. So it's well known that Cairo absorbing most of the country resources. So it has 100% of the ministries, 95% of the national medical, over 75% of the bank deposit, recreational areas, etc. On the other hand, it possesses over 18 million inhabitants, and this is expected to be doubled by 2030. In Cairo, we have over 21 etc. Polluted industrial zones, and this gives us a huge challenges in air, water, solid waste, and noise pollution. In some cases, we can find that the acceptable level of world standard in Cairo becomes 90 times. Therefore, in the strategic plan for Greater Cairo region, one of the projects that I have the honor to manage, we have a different project methodology. We started with data collection and inhabitants involvement from all stakeholders. And then we have a non-spatial vision and special zones. The non-spatial zones has the banking, the environment, the media, etc. And then we have a global vision objective formulation in order to have the benchmarking, to know where is Cairo located in comparison to other similar metropolitan areas. Then we have a definition for the priority projects and then the overall consideration. I will take you clearly to overview the output of the project. We have one vision, and the sustainable development and sustainable environmental planning is one of them, in addition to the social justice and the economic competitiveness. Here are the 8 moves, and I will shed light on it in the next slide. And then we have a particular projects that might minimize the environmental impact. The 8 moves was divided to thematic and sectorial. Thematic areas cover the development quality by improving the living condition, and then providing a competitive environment, and end with the environmental friendly projects. Where the sectorial linked more to the urban and physical projects, where enhancing the region transportation infrastructure, as well as the inner city, set up a more applicable governance system and strengthen the new communities, as well as create a condition for tourism flourish. I'm going to take you directly to the environmental friendly way that how can we cure this. So we want to reach a high area ratio green area and public spaces, minimize source of population by relocating the high polluting industry, as well as providing an innovative vehicle related methods that minimize the CO2 emission, as well as upgrade the water and infrastructure solid waste management methods. This ends with micro and micro environmental interventions, where we provide a number of projects that most of them is undergoing at the moment, as like a new ring road, the regional ring road for Cairo, connecting from new urban communities using PRT, the bus rapid transit, and other transportation system to minimize the CO2 emission from the transportation, public transportation in particular, the super tram, and in addition to enhancing the waste recycling system, relocating polluted industries outside the capital. The second intervention is Al-Alamein, the Al-Alamein new project, the new city Al-Alamein in the northern coast, where the productive urban environmental friendly development. In this project, we have an innovative methodology as well in order to controlling and make sure that the environment is sustainable and resources are protected. So we have an expert workshop, including the Arab, Awlad Ali, Arab who is living on the area, native people as well, in addition to most of the government representative. And we had a baseline study to assess why is the new settlements in Egypt not working. We have a number of more than 22 new settlements in Egypt, new towns, which is not working as designed. And based on this, we had a conceptual plan that was assessed to provide a productive economy, to avoid the massive and the polluted industries. This was assigned by providing an assessment feasibility study. We had appraisal for the 3 generations of the cities, starting from 1973 and to 1982, and we linked them number of inhabitants in each generations of new cities, and we link it to the land use to show how the land use affect the attracting the expected number of population. And we end up with that the more land uses and job opportunities that we can provide, the more people that can be attracted to new towns. Accordingly, we have made a productive assessment to see how can we provide good job opportunities that save the resources on the one hand and provide a massive and mass employees on the other hand. So we provided a gap analysis, economic structure, in order to see the competitive place, the customer need, as well as the city expected role over the city region. And we end up with the internal word, how Al Alamein can provide a different business model for new cities in Egypt. So by the end of the day, we end up with this. We have a very limited level of economic activities that can attract and generate economy, as well as the bottom-up analysis will not be the best way. It has to be strategically identified how Al Alamein can play a role for the city region, as well as can play as a gate for Egypt to Europe. We'll end up with, we need to establish for a smart specialization, a platform based on the knowledge-based industry that can help to generate jobs that environmentally friendly and nature-based. Therefore, we have a certain number of criteria that show how can Al Alamein started as a knowledge-based. In addition to provide a criteria to develop the city, quality of life, and to be a resilient city that can survive. Furthermore, how can we provide an ecological limit of the city representing the limit of amount of resources? Finally, we have provided the government with resource efficiency measurement and the sustainable way of running the city. Further, to adopt an ecosystem approach, the strategic environmental impact assessment for Al Alamein was taking the way, providing the mitigation measures to make sure that we save the resources as well as professionally using it. And finally, integrated the competitive in the cycle of the industry. This will end up with the need that the environment is a challenge, and the challenge here is the development. And I believe in this case, we need supporters as well as innovators who can see the challenge and the bottleneck as an opportunity. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Bassem, for the keynote speech. Very insightful indeed, and I'm really personally glad to know about the new Al Alamein city and how it's being designed to be environmentally friendly. And now we're going to start the panel discussion of today. The triple bottom line, how can corporate, environmental, and social responsibility can help fight climate change? We have on the panel of the discussion, Engineer Maysoon Nabil, the director of EPAP 3 at the Ministry of Environment. Engineer Maysoon has 20 years of experience in project management, with a focus on environment management, industrial pollution prevention, cleaner production, and energy efficiency. In addition, she has been involved in the development of a number of donor projects. Engineer Maysoon Nabil, since 2006, has managed the EEAA project management unit for EPAP and coordinated closely with the government ministries and agencies as well as donors, private sector, industrial establishments, and other stakeholders. Engineer Maysoon, please. Our second panelist is Dr. Abir al-Shinnawi. She's an associate professor at the economics department at AUC. Dr. Abir acquired her PhD in applied economics from the University of Minnesota in the United States. She's currently an associate professor at the economics department at AUC. She has taught a variety of courses in the area of environmental economics, growth, development, macroeconomics, and microeconomics theory. She also worked as a senior economist at the Egyptian Center for Economic Studies in Cairo. She helped conduct applied research to promote the role of the private sector in the development of Egyptian economy and identify constraints that might impede this role. Dr. Abir, please. Our third panelist is Dr. Nihal Al-Magharbil, the Program Manager of Urban Policies, Legislation and Governance Unit in UN Habitat, Egypt Office. Dr. Al-Magharbil was the Vice Minister of Planning and Monitoring and Administrative Reform for Monitoring. She was also a Senior Assistant to the Minister of Planning, Monitoring and Administrative Reform for Economic Affairs. During the period from 2014 to 2016, she led a group of more than 200 experts, academics, representatives of civil society and private sector and government officials to develop the Sustainable Development Strategy Egypt Vision 2030, considered as a long-term strategy for Egypt, aligning national objectives to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. Dr. Nihal, please. Last but not least, we have Mr. Ioannis Bausch, a Monitoring and Evaluation Officer at the ILO Egypt Office. Mr. Ioannis worked as a monitoring for the Cairo office for the International Labour Organization, where he is part of a joint ILO Canada project on decent jobs for young people in Egypt. He also conducts research on the impact assessment of youth employment programs and analysis of labor market policies. Furthermore, he supports the ILO constituents and other youth-serving organizations in improving their result measurement systems and serves as a lecturer and facilitator in related trainings and workshops. Mr. Ioannis holds a research master in economics from the Timbergen Institute in Amsterdam. Please, Mr. Ioannis. I need to remind the audience, you have red sticky notes on the paper you received, so please write down the questions you have, and midway the panel discussion, someone will collect the sticky notes for the question for the panel. Good evening, everyone. So my first question would be to Engineer Maysoon. The question is, how can CESR become economically attractive so that corporations are encouraged to adopt strategies to become more environmentally friendly?
Okay, as I mentioned in early morning in my presentation, when I present some good example of solid implementation of projects with the corporate industry in Egypt, from the very brief presentation I did today, that on the cost-benefit analysis of the project implemented under the pollution abatement or pollution prevention under the industrial sector, there is really an economic impact coming from the from the concept of sustainable consumption production, As I said, we went beyond the compliance by using the high-tech technology and the best available techniques applicable for the for the Egyptian industry. Achieved saving resources, saving in energy consumption, and also the impact on the environmental quality for the communities surrounding and for the workers. As I mentioned today morning, that introducing, for example, alternative fuel in the cement sector, that reduced the fossil fuel consumption on some of these companies by 40% of their energy consumption by alternative. We created a market, a business for this kind of projects. On the other hand, for SME sector, which we try to support this sector to be bankable and to move them from the informal sector to formal sector. All of this business is not treated from the environmental point of view only, but also from the economic point of view. As I said in early morning, that the charcoal example, the national program for upgrading and rehabilitation of the charcoal industry in Egypt and moving them from informal sector to formal sector, when we look for the economic benefits, we found that the simple payback period would be done in 6 months, in addition to the huge reduction of the environmental emission loads. So there is potential.
The reason I'm asking this question, because there is an argument, Engineer Maysoon, that many corporations just focus in their CSR or CESR. Basically, in this case, it's CSR, because they just focus on the economic part and the social part. So mainly, what's important for them is their image. So they sometimes just ignore, or I don't want to say ignore, but give less importance to the environmental aspect within their corporate social responsibility. That's the...
If you look for the environmental aspect, you are going to find that you are losing resources. If we will give an example for the water consumption, as I said today morning, that now we have to look for the resources, the water, energy. Now the companies are starting looking for the zero liquid discharge concept instead of just treatment the water, because when you look for the input and outcomes, you are going to lose money if you discharge it as a waste through air emission, through water emission, or solid waste. It's again should be translated into money. So if you have a very good management system within the facility, you have to make your balance and benchmark review for the input and output. So of course it's mainly linked to the operation and mainly linked to the economic benefits of the production and the facility.
Okay. Thank you, Engineer Maysoon. And now I have a question for Dr. Nihal. From an urban planning perspective, how can we ensure and encourage corporations to become more green?
Let me first thank you for the invitation, and I'm sorry that I wasn't able to join the workshop this morning, but I'm very happy to be in the panel, and I'm very happy, of course, to be with my colleagues and friends. If you speak about UN Habitat, we are the custodian, as you might know, of SDG 11. The Sustainable Development Goal number 11, which is related to creating sustainable and resilient cities. And one of the targets under SDG 11 relates also to climate change, and in addition to the other targets related to good governance of urban governance. Sorry. So this is I have to speak loud. So there are a number of targets under the SDG 11. One of them is related to, as I said, climate change. I think that we are in a position to promote for sustainable and green urban development. And this is actually what we're working on in our program in the Egypt office and also worldwide. I think that my colleague Dr. Bassem mentioned the two examples, Al Alamein and the work he's doing in Cairo, the great work. in the greater Cairo region. And I'm also happy that I'm a part of this project working on good practices of urban development in city extension using new techniques. It's related to land readjustment. And this is also, again, stressing on the point that was mentioned by Her Excellency Dr. Yasmin about managing resources and how we can better manage resources in order to avoid all the slum areas that when we move around Cairo, and if you go to Qalyubiyya or to other governorates, we find the slum areas and the unplanned city extensions. So we're working on this new methodology of land readjustment, and it's basically related to it's a negotiation between the landowners and the city, supposedly the city council, or now the executive council at the governorate level, in order to make use better or the best and most efficient use of the land, and to make sure that there are infrastructure that are provided to the different land, and we have the detailed planning so that the landowners can benefit and increase the value of the land, and also make use of it to have houses or to have other projects according to the studies and the suitability of the land use. So, of course, this might not be related to green per se, but it is fighting the slum areas and the slum extension. And again, as we all know that the slum, they don't have the environment there is very highly polluted, and also they don't have the infrastructure related to solid waste management, related also to water and sanitation. So the life there, we cannot describe it as good as we wanted it to be. So this is from one part. The other part related maybe to good governance. Maybe this is another area where we can talk about that management. I think that we all face management problem in different aspects in Egypt, but if we talk about environment and urban development, definitely governance and management of resources is key. So aligning different laws related to planning, the planning when you talk about socioeconomic planning, or when we talk about spatial planning, when you talk planning at the macro level or at the central level, planning at the local level. So when we have a good governance system and a good integration system of planning, and related also to finance, I think this has a great role in availing resources that can help the government as well as other stakeholders in making sure that we have green urban development. Let me say that also that we face a lot of challenges in this area, because urbanization, from one hand, is very good to growth and development. There is a lot of evidence, and countries experience the best practices that there is a positive correlation between urbanization and economic growth and development. But at the same time, urbanization is putting a lot of pressure on our resources and also on our climate. So we here have to make this balance.
The right balance. Thank you, Dr. Nihal. Dr. Abir, I have a question. How do you view the role / the effect of communication as a tool to create and initiate tangible CESR initiatives, rather than that these initiatives are used as just a tool to craft a positive corporate image?
There must be communication between the government and businesses. So the government must communicate to businesses their targets for pollution reduction and for fighting climate change. And there must be communication between businesses, because corporate social responsibility is a source of competition between firms. So if firms know that one firm is successful in publishing corporate social responsibility reports and is actually meeting its targets, then other firms will also be keen to imitate and follow suit.
Thank you, Dr. Abir. And I have another question, if you may. What, in your opinion, what are the best practices that could be adopted by our corporations in Egypt that could help us reduce our carbon footprint? And what are the success stories that we have as well that we can export to other countries, let's say?
Well, the most important practice is energy efficiency. Okay, so firms can reduce their carbon footprint by adopting cleaner technology, by using clean inputs, by raising awareness among their employees on how to reduce energy. For example, a simple example is basically if companies recycle their paper, they save trees, and trees absorb carbon dioxide, so this is one way to combat climate change. Adopt renewable energy and innovate in the area of renewable energy. So all these are examples of good practice.
And Dr. Abir, do you know of any success stories that we have in Egypt that have actually adopted such strategies and they were successful in it, so that maybe this could be a success story that as Egypt we could export?
Well, I didn't do any research in this area, so I don't know of success stories, but I know that a very big challenge facing corporations or firms in general in Egypt is that, for example, if you look at the manufacturing sector, it's mostly dominated by small and medium enterprises, and these enterprises are not eco-literate. So how can you expect that they adopt corporate social responsibility when they are eco-illiterate? Okay. But Her Excellency, the Minister of the Environment, has talked about success stories, so maybe she's in a better position to...
True. Engineer Maysoon has a comment on that.
Of course, Her Excellency, that she's the best one that to as I said in early morning, that we have different programs. One of these programs is the industrial energy efficiency. It's GF Finance under UNIDO management. And actually, we have a very successful projects, an example of energy efficiency under the industrial sector, mainly concentrated on system optimization and having energy efficiency system within the facilities. We have different sector. We have petroleum, chemical, food sector, and I think if you would like to elaborate more.
No, I just want not to give an example, but to highlight one important fact here. And again, this is important. We're living in a very dynamic world. And what the companies used to do on a voluntary basis 10 years ago, just to like what you're saying, get the image and things like that, it's not actually what is happening today. Because that is translated into money. And the more they're saving within their operations, the more it's better for them. Not for the cost of the revenue, but for one simple thing. There is an awareness because of the dynamic world that those companies, if they are not adopting what we call the low-cost, innovative, eco-friendly technologies, they will just keep their product within the country. Competitiveness equals efficiency. And efficiency here is the resource efficiency. Like Dr. Abir has mentioned, energy efficiency, she talked about renewable. I would even go more into an in-depth and say the use of the water itself. This is a resource efficiency. So competitiveness in this world right now equals efficiency. And that would bring us more into what kind of measures or tools that we in Egypt, and this is a very big question that we need to leave ourselves with, can adopt to have more circular economy. Because this is what is happening around us in the world. We cannot really just close our eyes and say, we're doing fine, we are much more progressing than 10 years ago. No, we need always to see what is really happening around us.
Thank you, Your Excellency.
Can I just add one thing?
Sure.
It's also related to CSR, and as Dr. Abir mentioned, that most of the firms are small and medium, and they don't have the capacity to adopt such techniques. But here there is a role for the large firms, since they are working, if they have a CSR program, they can work on their stakeholders, and one of the main stakeholders are their suppliers. And sometimes these suppliers are small and medium enterprises, so they can also give them the tools to adopt these techniques that are energy, they can apply energy efficient techniques and others through the CSR that the firms are doing. It's not only to the community, the consumers, but also to their constituency or their stakeholders, mainly the suppliers.
I actually, if I may, I want to disagree with Dr. Abir, because as I mentioned in the beginning, the problem is not from the SMEs. Like the problem is coming from big corporations, especially the very high energy, like the firms working in the petroleum industry, basically, like BP, Chevron, these companies, and also I think in some industries, like very big industries, and of course Engineer Maysoon can add on that, like the cement industry, like these industries, like this is the problem lies within those big corporations. But of course, like SMEs definitely should be considered within the loop because they are. Yeah. You want to add something? Oh,
yeah.
sure.
I just would like to highlight that really the consumption of the resources for the large enterprises is much bigger than the consumption of the cluster of the SMEs in Egypt. Yani if you compare مثلا the fertilizer sector, we have a very big five fertilizer companies in Egypt. Their consumption from their water, energy is much higher than if you collect the cluster for tanneries, foundries, and this is why. But we have a point that the environmental impact of this SME cluster project is more significant than if you put the investment in large enterprises. And this is what I was talking today, that the investment cost for this corporate enterprises is very high comparing to the investment cost for moving the informal sector under the SMEs to formal sector. And this is why when we studying the priorities of this financing under the MOE, Ministry of Environment, we calculated the unit cost of reducing the pollutant, like the unit cost of reducing the TSP, that coming out of the SMEs comparing to the large enterprises. We find a very big variance. We have for the TSP, for example, if we are talking about SME, the cost is about 0.15 US dollars, and sometimes it's reached to large enterprises 21 US dollars. Actually, this was a report issued by World Bank in early 2015 as part of the ICR report, which is calculating and showing us the environmental impact from the quantities perspective for ton of reduction of pollutant, comparing to the unit cost of the pollutant from the large and the SME sector. This is why we have to put in our consideration, we are talking about large enterprises, that the environmental impact in SME sectors is much better with lower cost comparing to the corporate.
Well, small and medium enterprises comprise the majority of firms, and if they are users of energy, then we still care about their carbon footprint, so we want them to be responsible also, just like big corporations.
Thank you, Dr. Abir, for the clarification. I have a question for Mr. Ioannis. The question is related to M&E. So my question is, how can M&E become the common language spoken by all stakeholders in order to ensure that CESR is achieving its intended purposes?
Well, thank you very much for that question, and let me maybe start by just thanking you for inviting the ILO to the table here. while the ILO might be not the first UN agency to think about when you consider climate change, actually it's of tremendous importance to us at the ILO when we consider green jobs, when you consider environmentally friendly employment policies. And you know, your question about M&E relates in an interesting way to climate change. I think both topics, monitoring, evaluation, but also climate change, are actually very much cross-cutting. They concern each and every one of us, while in practice sometimes both of them are pushed a little bit into one direction, say, well, you're the specialist on climate change, you're the environmental ministry, you deal with environmental issues, and then here the Ministry of Economic Affairs or Business is dealing with the economy. While no, I think this should be, and we can agree on all of that, and that was mentioned before, that in everything we do, in all the economic operations we do, no matter whether we talk about small or medium businesses or big corporations, we need to think about our environmental responsibility. And so that also then applies to obviously thinking about how we can learn from what we do, which brings us to your question to M&E. So the first thing that we would say at the ILO, looking at our CESR portfolio and looking into learning is, well, M&E very often has that kind of touch of being done only for accountability reasons, only for reporting reasons. I think that's kind of the first. All right, let's try again. So I think that's the first thing we need to clarify. Evaluation, monitoring, this is also maybe for accountability, but it's also very much for learning. And if you want to bring all stakeholders on board, we need to talk to everyone and say, oh, actually, what do we want to learn? What do we want to learn about together? Is it about best practice? Is it about the future? Is it about what kind of needs there are in local communities? And I think that's a great way to first of all identify and ask everyone, okay, what do we want to learn? And that then brings me to my second point. What we observe at the ILO is that many corporations and companies are actually willing to step into CESR business, which can mean, and we can come to that maybe a little later, that can of course mean greening their own interventions, but it can also mean to contribute to development projects. And what we see is that many corporations are willing to move from what we might call from a charity approach to a development approach. But that, of course, means taking environmental CSR projects seriously, not just considering that as something that is done just between parentheses, but just for charity, but it is done to have a real impact. And so if we want to take that seriously, obviously that means that we need to understand what we are achieving, what kind of results we are achieving, and what kinds of lesson we learn. So I think that's something we should remind ourselves, that when we talk about CESR, we are talking about interventions that we do need to understand better, and we do need to integrate in or link to development frameworks, to frameworks like the ultimately Vision 2030 or on national development frameworks in their specific policy areas. And I think once we realize that, we can also realize that actually M&E, the beauty of that is that as it's so cross-cutting, there's a lot of guidance out there. For example, at the ILO, we developed a lot of tools around measuring impacts of employment interventions. And just for purpose of illustration, I brought a guide with me that we published at the ILO earlier this year on measuring decent jobs for youth, but it equally applies to many projects in the green sector, and it's available in English and Arabic. And I think this is something that we can then do next, to say, okay, what kind of tools do we have to actually make this agenda operational? And yeah, maybe we'll follow up on some other points later.
Thank you, Mr. Jonas. My next question is for Dr. Nihal. The question is that some scholars argue that the emergence of CESR is associated with the shift in the public policy from government to governance, and the crucial role of the private sector plays in governance, of course. In your opinion, how could all the stakeholders, government, private sector, and non-governmental organizations, identify, support, and invest in boundary spanners in order to enable this governance scheme fully?
There is this debate going on now that CSR could replace or could complement the role of the government. So I prefer that we stick to the idea that it complements, not replace, because there is this debate, because as we say that the government failed, also private sector failed, so markets failed. So we have to take a combination of both and not just talk about government only or private sector only. Then if we agree on this approach, then we need to talk about, as you mentioned, going from government to governance, and then put all the principles that would support a good governance system for the partnership between the private sector and the government to complement and not to contradict or to compete. So this is a very important thing. An element that I also found in an earlier paper that I published, I think in 2008, and it was about CSR, and at that time talking about CSR in Egypt was a new concept. That as we all said that the SDS is now, or the Sustainable Development Strategy for Egypt, is now a platform for all partners to join, and we join efforts, and we have also an M&E system to complement the SDS. So as if we were talking about the SDS, also we need to have another a framework for all the private sector to work under this platform, be it the SDS or another strategy, another plan to complement the SDS. If you look at the Sustainable Development Strategy and the different pillars, we find a very clear role for the private sector and for the civil society complementing the role of the government. But again, we need to have this this umbrella, or to have a common platform for the private sector. Just in order to, we have limited resources and we have a lot of challenges. So in order to maximize the benefit.
Yeah, of course, when I talk about governance, that doesn't take away the role of the government, but it just puts it in the steering position, as you all may know. But of course, as we all know, there is no governance without government. But my question was about the boundary spanners, the people who go out of their box, let's say, in the different entities in order to reach for the other partner within this governance scheme. So my question was about how can we identify them and support these people? How can we invest in those boundary spanners in order to fully enable this governance scheme?
Okay, I was after talking about what I said, I was going to jump into something that you might know about, which is the UNPDF. The UNPDF is the UN program that relates, or it's the partnership between the government and all the development partners. And a good part of, or a pillar of the UNPDF is exactly talking about what you're mentioning, is how we can find or can reach those innovative ideas, those people that are doing a step further, and how we can support them and also mainstream them in the governance and the mainstream of the policy making. So I think this is also a good example of partnership between government and the development partners. And one of the key elements that the UNPDF identified is that we have a very big financing gap. And to fill this financing gap, there is a role for the private sector. So here we have the government, the private sector, and the development partners working in a partnership, exactly, not to do business as usual, because as Her Excellency mentioned, and as we also mentioned this clearly in the Sustainable Development Strategy, that doing business as usual will not do the leapfrog that we're looking for will not achieve all these targets that are mentioned there. So I think that a good partnership would help in identifying these innovative ideas, those people who are willing to do more, the private sector who are willing to do not just for la farm, as we say, but very specific initiatives that really make a difference.
Thank you, Dr. Nihal. My next question is for Engineer Maysoon. If you may please tell us about what is the role of CESR in the Egyptian NDCs in the light of the Paris Agreement?
Okay. The NDCs. Egypt's NDC is actually split into two parts, mitigation and adaptation. For the mitigation part, let me give you a very specific example on that. Definitely part of the climate change portfolio is the climate finance. Is that if we need to mitigate or adapt, then at the other side there should be the financial resources, the capacity building, and the technology transfer. The CESR is an integral part of that. What happened 2 years ago, and this is part of the portfolio of climate change, is that Egypt embarked on the very ambitious feed-in tariff for the electricity. When we had that issue of the cutoff of electricity and starting to boom into the part related to the renewable energy. At that time, that was October 2016, October 2017, the potential private sector to invest in the renewable energy in Egypt, but there was a marginal risk, a risk to go into that process because of the price itself. What happened is that the climate change, through the Green Climate Fund and through the Ministry of Environment, packaged with the EBRD a financial bundle package between the Climate Finance Fund and the Bank Fund in order to support the private sector first wave of investment for renewable energy projects. So what we are seeing right now happening in Egypt all over the past year of the Bimban project and all those kind even of small and medium solar panel projects are really part of what I called in my session the enabling environment. You cannot go into an implementation of a project or of a pilot project saying that on paper this is very good when there is no market, when you are not providing an enabling environment. Thank God that we were able at that point of time to realize that before embarking into the implementation of the feed-in tariff, there was a risk, there was a margin risk for the private sector. And we just pulled out the Climate Finance Fund into that. Apply this to anything. Apply this to energy efficiency model. Apply this even to the kind of adaptation projects. Egypt is vulnerable to climate change. Adaptation is a priority. We are now facing floods and droughts. What I can see from the examples around me is that there is a kind of an awareness raising even to the big corporates on what kind of adaptation measure that they can help in. The treated wastewater, the reuse of the sludge. By the way, those are things that when you come to think about it, these are sanitation issues and sanitation problem, but in fact these are adaptation measures. We are adapting here. Looking also on what kind of an innovative idea, insurance scheme that we can put to the community that are most affected by the floods or the drought. That's happening in other parts of the world, and this is part also of a CESR tool. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for the very informative, in detail answer. I would just like to remind the audience about the sticky notes that you have. If you have any questions, please write them down. Someone will pass by now and collect those sticky notes if you have any questions. Okay, my next question is for Dr. Abir. Some scholars argue that there is a gap between the research and the policy making, and this is one of the reasons affecting the CESR performance. So, in your opinion, how can we bridge this gap between the research or the papers or the know-how in research and the policy making?
Well, in terms of research, there's very little research in the area of the environment, and the main reason is data. We don't have access to data. For example, I've worked on the environment just because it happens that the models I use data that is published. But if I want to work on air pollution or water pollution, I can't find the data. So data is a very big problem. And then there must be communication channels between the government and researchers at universities so that they can benefit from our research and we can benefit from what they do. So I think channels of communication should be enhanced to make better use of research.
But I mean, like in the policy making, like for policymakers, like let's say people in the government or the legislative authority of our country, the argument is that sometimes they find it hard because the research articles, for example, are very lengthy or not just straight to the point of what can be fed into the policy making process. Well, so this is where the argument is coming from. But the data, I mean, if the policymaker is also the one who has the data, so I don't think this should be a problem. But the problem is adapting research and what's published out there in the world versus localizing it here.
The research that has been done is mainly technical. But I think that holding conferences or workshops where researchers can disseminate the results of the research or their findings in a non-technical language, then this can be very helpful for policymakers.
Okay. So the answer lies within having more explanation for the research or more discussions like what we're having
more
here
communication between policymakers and research institutes
between
or
both parties. Yeah. Okay, Engineer Mason, want to add something?
Elaborate because we discussed this point in early morning and actually under the Ministry of Environment we have our website and we have the online monitoring system, which you can see through the periodic reports, the quality of the air quality on the Greater Cairo area, and we just installed one of the monitoring station in Upper Egypt. So the data is available, but the point that's how to use this data. On the other hand, you know that our environmental impact assessment system is in line with the World Bank system, and one of these conditions is public disclosure. If you went to the website of WEA, Egyptian Environmental Affairs Agency, that you are going to find a lot of research guidelines, manuals that showing for specific sectors what's exactly the, for example, for industrial sector, we have self-monitoring manuals, which can tell you exactly in each industrial sector what's the inputs and what's the outcomes, and what's the expected level of pollutant and how it will work when you have the best available techniques.
Yes.
On the other hand, the Ministry of Environment have a new project. Actually, it's financed from the national budget called emission inventory, which will be tackle industrial emissions, solid waste, agriculture, and we have our partner is Cairo University. We started this project in early 2017. And you will going by next year, the phase one, that you will be able to see about a system that you can know if you are located in Helwan, for example, if you are X company, we can show you and tell you what's the X company contribution on the air quality or in water quality, not only limited for industrial sector, but also open for agriculture and waste sector. And of course, this type of data will be accessible, but in a limited, on the needs or published depend on the security and confidentiality of this data.
So this is basically new.
We have public. We will going to publish very soon a web-based system, which you can allow all the public with a certain accessibility to see the data. Now you can go to the website and see the annual report for the air quality in not only in Greater Cairo but from all over governorates. We have in some areas the level of particulates is much higher than the limits. Yani we already disclosure this.
But water pollution.
In water, we are not responsible. Yes. For monitoring the water on the Nile River or the sea, it's under responsibility of Ministry of Housing and Ministry of Water Irrigation.
Thank you. My next question is for Mr. Jonas. Can you please tell us more about how can CESR become a tool for creating more jobs, more green jobs in Egypt, specifically if you can contextualize the question to Egypt, and also what's the role of ILO in that regard?
Yeah, sure, of course. So maybe let me just start by say very little bit what we understand when we talk about green jobs. For the ILO, green jobs are all jobs that are concerned with preserving, restoring or enhancing the environment, so very broad. They can be, if you want to have kind of a bit of a conceptual framework, you can think about jobs that directly provide green products or services, renewable energy, for example, waste recycling, for example, or also, so that's one part, and the other part of green jobs are jobs within existing companies, not necessarily in the green sector, that are making business operation more environmentally friendly, right? So kind of greening existing operations, using resources more efficiently. So these are the kind of types of green jobs that the ILO is promoting and putting as one of the cornerstones of the decent work agenda. And you know, as you asked for specific examples within Egypt, so for the first one, for example, the ILO is working together with the Ministry of the Environment under the solid Start Your Waste Recycling Business program. We are happy that you know, we could sign an agreement last year with the ministry and provide training to start up companies in the waste recycling industry, and I think that's an interesting training program for starting businesses, something that can also be supported through CSR. Now I think the answer to CSR and the corporate world more specifically is kind of twofold. First of all, I would say development begins at home. So obviously this is what we talk when we talk about greening operations, when we talk about using our resources efficiently, and I think each and every company should ask themselves the question, how can I make my operations more sustainable, because this is what in the long run will be making my business more profitable and what is required just simply if you want to make ends meet in a couple of decades, or as we learned just last week, maybe we don't even have that much time left. And secondly, and I think I also would like to emphasize that point, is that obviously CESR can also be take the form of financing development projects. If we think about platforms, that starts with platforms like UN Global Compact, but major corporations can and should work together with other development actors, with ministries, UN agencies, NGOs, implementing development projects in the green sector. Her Excellency, you mentioned biogas initiatives that started 10 years ago. The ILO also just recently, through a CSR initiative, implemented a major biogas operation in Minya. And I think this is a good example where the ILO managed to put a model into practice and refined it, consulted with local communities to make sure that, you know, smallholder farmers can improve their livelihoods and at the same time create green jobs, as all these biogas digesters were constructed by young people and young engineers creating green jobs in Egypt. And I think that there are multiple areas, and we touched upon some of them that concern green energy, but also reskilling, vocational training, waste management, where I think contributions of the private sector would be more than welcome. And there's a wealth of actors available, UN and others, that would like to partner with private sector companies that are willing to say, well, we invest sustainably in development, we move away from maybe a specific project charity approach to more development approach, and we are willing to put some political commitment and also financial resource on the table.
Thank you. If you may also, can you inform us about what are the future programs or projects that your organization is going to go in the near future?
Yeah, sure. Maybe because I said development starts at home, so that also applies very much to the ILO itself. As some of you might know, we are one of the oldest UN agencies, and next year there is going to be the 100th birthday of the ILO, and as part of that, the ILO started what is called a centenary initiatives. One of them is the Green Initiative, and part of that is also to review our internal operations and to say, okay, what is actually the environmental policy that we would like to have for how we do business. So that's a thing, but obviously also to look more closely at our country operations and to mainstream our learnings from the Green Jobs program that we are running since a number of years throughout the employment strategies that we are advising on and actually throughout our work. So maybe the answer is a bit blurry and broad, but I think that's also because the nature of the topic doesn't so much call for specific projects or programs, but more for an integration of these learnings throughout the operations of the house and the agency.
Thank you. My last question, and then we're going to take the questions from the floor, is for Engineer Maysoon. In Egypt, it is evident that the CESR initiatives are very scattered. So how can we somehow create a network of these initiatives in order to maximize the impact and most importantly to prevent the repetition of work done in the field?
The next work.
Be responsible for it. Now what we have discussed with the Ministry of Investment and International Cooperation is to include the potential investment in the environment area on the portal of the investment portal of the Ministry of Investment and International Cooperation. Yeah, there is a portal there. It has all the opportunities of investment. This, for me, is more of a virtual platform. This is the whole idea about it. The idea is that if we're convinced that the CESR is something voluntary, but it's coming now more into a need for the companies to adapt to that because they have benefits. So it's a win-win. It's a win-win for the companies and for the government. So in order to keep it like that, without restricting and putting the regulation to that thing and ensuring that there is a multiplier effect and an upscaling, then you need to let it be that way. Just fine-tune the modality of opening up, the market and the investment options for the companies in order to adapt more CESR. Thank you.
So Doctor, if we hypothetically speak that there is, for example, the CESR initiatives, for example, are identified by different ministries, let's say in the health sector or in the environment sector, would you imagine that these needs would be like reflected on some sort of a map that actually combines all of these needs, and where actually companies who want to perform this voluntary CESR can actually go and see the opportunities or where they want to, yeah.
It's already what the Ministry of Investment and International Cooperation launched 2 weeks ago is a CESR initiative and a platform. And the reason why they were around the same table, in the same room, is to exchange experience, to see who is doing what, though their areas of expertise and their knowledge is completely different. So you have the IT person with the industry, with the cement factory, with the person working on the dates and the agriculture and the farming. So we are talking about different production schemes. Plus that this map that I'm telling you about already exists. There is a map for the investment opportunities. The idea is that if we are giving those as a tools, like the platform or the program for the CESR exchange of views and a platform as well like a map, we still need to work more to reach out to them. And reaching out is very important, and reaching out is important not only to hear from them. That's the problem with the environment sector. We've been in 20 years locking ourselves in the same room, speaking the same language, and then looking at one another year after the other saying, why the environment is not improving? Because we're simply not talking the language that others would understand. We need to go outside the room and reach out and listen to what they're saying.
Thank you, Dr. Yasmin. And now we can take a couple of questions from the audience. So there is a question, I believe Dr. Abir would best answer it, but of course if any of the panel want to share or add, please feel free. So the question is, how big can the potential of promoting circular economy cooperation between corporates and informal economy organizations be? So basically, what's the potential between promoting circular economy cooperation between the formal and the informal sector?
Well, the formal sector uses inputs from the informal sector. So the formal sector can make sure that the firms providing them with inputs are fulfilling their corporate social responsibility. So down the value chain, they ensure that each firm supplying them with inputs is also abiding by corporate social responsibility and reducing its footprint. Otherwise, they won't take inputs from it. So this is how.
Okay, thank you. Another question, do we have a benchmark for industries to determine their CESR potential? Is there some sort of, this is the line, this is Dr. Nihal? No? What's the benchmark? What are we measuring? Where does, like what Jonas said, where is the line between charity and development? Where do we draw this line?
I think the idea is the impact. It's not the benchmark, it's the impact. How is all the CSR or the CESR initiatives have impact. And here I just want to say that this is where M&E is very important, the evaluation. And if you have evaluation tool also of all these initiatives, it's very important that we stop and evaluate what is the impact on the society, on the environment, and so forth. And then, if you allow me, I just want to talk about what Her Excellency mentioned about not having an ownership. I tend to differ, if you allow me. I think we do need a platform, not only the Ministry of Investment and International Cooperation, and I followed the meeting that they had with the private sector. But I think, yes, we do need to have a platform for several reasons. One of them is for coordination. You know that sometimes when you have an opportunity for a CSR project or for a development project, you find all the partners, the private sector, or all the development partners like ourselves going into this governorate or into this project. It's easy, we can replicate it, and we say that we've done our role. So it's better to have a platform to coordinate This is one thing, and also to, as we said, that we need the outreach and to raise awareness. So we need also to have the best practices and the good examples escalated, and we shed lights on it. So I believe that there is potential for common. Who would own it? I'm not sure, but maybe business association like the Arab German, like others. I think they can play this role.
Yeah, I agree with you, but we have to have the dissemination and visibility of the best practice and the success stories on the CSRM. And you are right. I'm going to talk about EPAP program. We thought that we have 18 years working with industry, improving the environmental conditions, the economic conditions of the facilities, but we have lost the dissemination and visibility of these success stories. And we tackle it in the third phase. We have a communication strategy, and we will be able to disseminate the success stories in different sectors, not from the implementation point of view, but from the point that we can disseminate the new concept and the new practice under the industrial sector to achieve the best practice.
If I may add also about this platform, Your Excellency, I believe that what we might have in the near future is a map or a platform that shows the potential. But we don't have a platform, or we won't have in the near future a platform that monitors what is happening on the ground now. So, for example, this organization is working here, this organization is working there, because, for example, like I'm not wearing this hat today, but I'm working in the health sector of children, and we go invest in, for example, a university hospital. And then the next day, I read in the news that the Ministry of Health has just granted this same university like 20 million Egyptian pounds. So this is what we're talking about, that the initiatives are scattered. So even in the near future, if we're going to have a platform for the potential, we don't have definitely a platform for what's happening on the ground now. And this is what we need.
Maybe what we need, there are two things, 2 points of view here. One is the mapping of what's happening on the ground, that's an assessment, in order to further disseminate the best practices. And by the way, we can disseminate lessons learned, because maybe those who had started something and did not work out, that's a lesson also, that's something to disseminate. So I don't see it as a negative part. But what is really important in that dilemma, when there are an argument and a counter argument in that, is the government, for the evolution of the private sector, is to regulate the process, but not to monitor over the private sector. No, it's the other way around, is to provide the opportunities, to understand what are the challenges that are there for the private sector, for the companies to adopt, even to voluntarily exercise the CESR, and to support, overcome those challenges. And that's, even when you come to think about it, that was the philosophy behind the investment law in Egypt when it passed through the parliament, is what are the problems. I'm not saying that we were able to overcome all the challenges. There are still work in progress, and it's still a living document. But the idea is that, to listen to that, the idea is that you cannot, with all the due respect to that, but you cannot monitor the work of the private sector. And by the way, whether we, as a government, we're going to monitor what is happening, for an example, let us take the carbon footprint or the reduction of the greenhouse gases. It's coming. Paris Agreement obliged the countries to report by 2020 on the reduction of the greenhouse gases. So whether we like it or not as a government, we will be reporting back on what kind of initiatives from the private sector and from even the NGOs that were conducted, and from the government national funding that were able to reduce the greenhouse gases.
Thank you. There's another question from the audience, and also it's to the Ministry of Environment. They are claiming that the reports available online does not include data that could be helpful for proper research. So maybe if I interpret it correctly, for example, there is not enough data to do statistical analysis. So maybe, yeah, just the monitoring, but not like data. So can you?
Yes, there is not enough data. We are still working on that. 5 years ago, we did not disclose our air quality information. Okay? Now we are doing that. The data itself is an issue because we need to ensure that we are processing the right data and managing that properly in order to be utilized and disclosed to the public. And the idea of the data, honestly, is not just to give the figures of the PM10 or the PM2.5 or the greenhouse gases reduction. The idea is that how are you translating this data to information, and the information is being packaged to the different target audience. And that's very important. But that is, to be honest, we are still having work in progress into that. We understand that there is a gap between the researchers, between the universities and the government, not only for getting the data for the research, but even utilizing the on-the-shelf research. From that perspective, we have initiated a month ago a council or a committee that includes all the deputy deans for environment work at the level of the universities. And the idea of that is that we understand that we are not able to reach out to the youth at universities. We're not able to enable an environment for innovation or for projects related to the environment to go through. We're just closing ourselves in our own kitchen. And we're not able to understand what those universities would need from us in order to integrate more the environmental aspects. We cannot keep ourselves in our own ministry, locking our own doors, and then we're saying there's no innovation of environment in the research. There is no youth working more in green jobs. That we're not reaching out to them. We're not finding a way of going and working closely with them.
Thank you. Another question for the ministry from the audience. So the question is, what kind of cooperation is taking place between the Ministry of Environment and other ministries for climate change efforts? Dr. Yasmin Ward.
Okay, I will look at you. Okay. No, it's okay. It's okay. No. Out of respect, I should do so. That's fine. No, okay. Institutionally, we have what is called the National Council for Climate Change, and that National Council reports to the Prime Minister. It has all the line ministry in it, but the amazing thing about it is that you will not believe that Egypt negotiator team who goes each year to negotiate the climate change includes other line ministries. So it's not the Ministry of Environment alone. Adding to that, because, and as an evidence that the climate change is a developmental challenge, I'm really proud to tell you that our Ministry of Environment did not, for an example, there is something called the Green Climate Fund, which is a facility that provides finance for countries to face the adverse impact of climate change. The EBRD project that I was explaining about, another energy efficiency project, a Nile Delta project, the role of the Ministry of Environment here is to act as a facilitator to support other ministries to get the funds in order to mainstream the climate change in their daily work. So there is a continuous cooperation. There is a whole team working on the climate change, whether at the side of the negotiation, we're enlarging the stakeholders working on that to the extent that we take with us the representative from the Ministry of Water Resources, the representative from the Ministry of Electricity, Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Planning, Ministry of International Cooperation. All of those form part of Egypt negotiation team when you go at the end of each year to the negotiation. And we're now working on the youth. We're trying to get the second part of the thing, which is the youth at universities.
The last question, and it's also for the Ministry of Environment. So the question is, which sector of the SMEs are targeted in the EPAP 3?
Actually, in the SME sector, we have the informal sector. I'm going to specify specific sector like tanneries, foundries. We have a black area called Akrasha in Shobra Khima. They're working in plastic recycling. Our plan in a very deep cooperation with the co-financier of EPAP 3, mainly KfW EU, that to move this cluster from informal sector to formal sector, not just only to eliminate the source of pollution, but also to have a sustainable modernization system by using the best available technology, establish a business model, make these clusters bankable and operational in a proper way, and this will be done or will be happen in a very close cooperation with IDA, Industrial Development Authority, and the Ministry of Industry.
Thank you, Engineer Maysoon. Finally, I would like to thank everyone for the great discussion and questions. I would like to extend my appreciation to the panelists and the speakers for their time and effort. And last but not least, I would like to thank the organizers of the 55th Cairo Climate Talks, Engineer Amr Slim and Ms. Amina Sharaf, for their efforts in organizing this talk. Thank you all for coming to the 55th Cairo Climate Talks. And thank you, Your Excellence, for coming and for your time. Thank you, Your Excellence, for your coming and your time. Very much appreciated. Please join us. Drinks and snacks will be served outside. Please join us. Thank you all for coming.